Okay, so let's start with defining the chimp model first before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of how we can apply it to our lives.
Okay, so in terms of the model itself, so it's based in neuroscience. So Professor Steve Peters created this model really through years and years, over 30 plus years of looking at the neuroscience of the mind and how the mind works. And there's a number of sort of areas in the brain that are particularly important to help understand the model. And again, so this is simplified down even further because obviously the mind's extremely complex. But I think it is really important to understand it from a neuroscience point of view. It helps people really understand where, if you like, the three teams, which we can explain in a minute, come from. So a couple of areas of the brain, and people don't need to remember the names of them, but the amygdala and the orbitofrontal cortex are particularly of interest, and those parts of the brain develop when someone's about 8 weeks into fetal life, so jelly baby size. And these parts of the brain we share with most mammals. So the sort of the role, if you like, of these parts of the brain are survival of self and survival of species. So these are what house our instincts such as fight, flight, freeze, drives, food drive, territory drive, sex drive, all things that are important for survival of self and survival of species. And the fibres within these areas are very, very fast acting. Okay. And we say, well, that makes complete sense because they're to do with survival. And their basis, if you like, is with an emotional basis. So, sort of what I feel about a situation or a person. And you can see how that then impacts, the instinct to fight, flight, or freeze. So these areas of the brain, when we look at them in terms of, ourselves, we tend to sort of the characteristics of these sides of the brains are things like, thinking catastrophically, seeing things in black and white, irrational thinking, paranoid thinking, all the things that you can say, if you're out there in the wild, in the jungle, you need to have, in order to survive, you need to be hypervigilant. So that's sort of one area of the brain, and that transfers into the chimp. So within our model, that is the chimp. The next area of the brain is quite a larger. It encompasses quite a few different sort of structures within the brain, and again develops at the same time as the sort of the chimp's circuits as well. So 8 weeks into fetal life. And this includes areas such as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate gyrus. And these parts of the brain act like a massive storage system. So straight away, 8 weeks into fetal life, already things are being stored. So these areas of the brain store things such as memories, beliefs, automatic programs. So also an example of an automatic program would be, someone leaves their home address and arrives at their place of work without really remembering any of the journey, but it's been done safely. So these structures, we sort of term the computer within the model. So really acting like a storage system, like a computer, got a wealth of information there. But the wealth of information is there depending on what's been programmed over the years, how our chimp has interpreted, but also how our human has also interpreted, which I'll come on to as the third part. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, yeah.
So the computer, so whereas we've said like the chimp circuits are very, very fast acting, the computer's even faster. So it's like a computer, so it's actually 4 times faster than the chimp. And then the final area is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is an area sort of on the top of our head. And that tends to develop later in life, so sort of around about the age of 2 or 3 years old. And so anyone who's got like young children or toddlers around them, you can see this change happen when this part of this sort of part of the brain starts to develop, because the child starts to ask all what I call like the W questions: where, what, when, why, how, all these different kind of questions. And that is if you like, the human circuits coming on board. So they're slower to develop, but this is what gives us our higher executive functioning. Okay, so things such as working with facts and evidence. So the basis is like in a logical basis, whereas the chimp, we sort of said, is looking at things from an emotional basis. So it's slower to come on board. It's always slower to, if you like, come into the conversation, but we can use this area of the brain to give us things such as solution finding, problem solving, using facts and evidence. So looking at things rationally, seeing things in shades of grey, working with probability. So very different, if you like, with a different agenda from the chimp. So when we look at the model, we say we've got 3 teams available to us at any one time: the chimp, the computer, and the human. And the only bit that we can, if you like, have control over is the human ourselves. That's who we are. Whereas the chimp and the computer, it's independent. That side of our brain, it's independent of us. And the key for what we're going to talk about today is it can think independently of us. It has a different agenda to what, if you like, the adult human has. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. So is our aim to balance those 3 teams, or is it to know what team to use in certain situations? What should we be aiming for?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's to have an awareness that at any one time, any of us have these 3 teams available to us. And it's about, the skills are about understanding which team you're operating in that time. And is that the appropriate team? And if not, how you can move from what team you're in to the other team. But any of this is skills. So it takes a lot of time. And it takes, effort, not a huge amount of effort, but regularly small amounts of effort to really get the skills to understand that. So most people will sort of present to the world a mixture of all 3. But very commonly it will be chimp and computer that is presented to the world. And sometimes the only people who really know who you are is you, when you're at home behind closed doors. So a lot of times when we work with people to understand the model, it can be quite tricky for people to understand, well, who am I? Because I feel like I'm a whole mix. I can be so logical and rational, and then this emotional side takes over and sabotages what I'm wanting to do and all my good intentions. And that's really normal. And within the model and within chimp management, we say, well, that is normal. It is really unhelpful, but it is normal. You've got a chimp at the moment that's in the driving seat, and it is sabotaging your best laid plans, if you like. And that, again, when we go back to what we've just talked about with the neuroscience, the human is no match for the chimp. The chimp's 5 times faster and stronger, which is why when you can feel in that inner battle, that inner conflict, you think, well, I didn't want to do that, and I've done it again. I'm repeating the same patterns. Why? And then thinking, well, there must be something wrong with me. Other people seem to be able to do it. And then comes sort of like that, downward spiral of beating yourself up. And, so it can very commonly feel like in a conflict. So when I work with a client, I will map things out and they will go, okay, yeah, I see absolutely where the chimp is acting. And I see where I'm trying to come in, but the chimp is just overpowering me, backed up by some stuff that's in the computer.